Okay, so this is going to be a quick little video. I'm going to show you two very short clips by two very smart people who never agree on anything. One is going to be from Jerome Powell himself. Earlier today, he gave the second part of his testimony. That clip is going to show you one aspect. Then I'm going to show you another clip, a minute and a half long, by Ray Dalio. Now, these guys, mind you, they don't agree on nothing. Let's start with Ray Dalio first.
So let's talk about Jay Powell's dilemma right now. You describe it as a dilemma. He appeared this week and basically took a hard look at the debt market, at the treasury market, looked in the eye and said, I'm not going to do anything to help you. And they didn't like it very much. And so the 10-year kept going. At what point is there enough pain? And what form does that pain take? Is it really financial conditions tightening? I mean, does it have to get to be 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4?
Think of the economy as being like an individual and their pulse is dropping. When the pulse is dropping, the doctors come running in with the stimulant and they inject stimulant. Now that the economy is rebounding, and inflation pressures are rebounding, there's not the same pressure to administer that stimulation. When it happens, when it becomes a problem, is first, the rising interest rates start hurting financial asset prices. First, typically, they hurt bonds. Then they pass through and hurt stocks because still interest rates affect stocks. And when that starts to affect stocks, that's one thing. Maybe the stock market can correct 10 or 15% and the Federal Reserve can tolerate it. When it goes beyond that and starts to affect the economy, that's when you see the real trade-off have to surface. So that's what that looks like.
Let me explain what he says here because it needs a little bit more finesse. Now, Ray is actually saying something really smart. While you should have been administrating stimulus checks when this whole thing started, right now the economy is already rotating, already recovering. And while the economy is already rotating and recovering, you have inflationary pressures on the market because there's more consumption, right? There's a lot more money in the system. The interest rates are very, very low. So people are spending. And in that environment, printing more money, giving away another $2 trillion in stimulus, it's like giving a stimulant shock to a person who's about to walk out of the hospital. It's probably not going to be as effective or as healthy for that person as a person who needs that stimulus on an operating table. In fact, it might cause a lot of harm. So that example, that analogy by Ray was really, really good in my opinion. Now, what he's saying here is also something really interesting. He's saying the same thing I said in my previous video. Essentially, at some point, as dovish as Jerome Powell is, he will have no choice but to raise interest rates because that's going to be his only tool to battle a runaway inflation. Now, when he's talking about inflation here, he's talking about inflationary pressures coming from the market actually coming back to life. Now, here's the thing. The other thing he's saying here is that once this thing happens, he can tolerate a certain amount of inflation. But at some point, which is the point of no return, that's how we call it, he'll have literally no choice. His hands will be tied and he'll have to raise the interest rates, which will cause a massive correction in the stock market or maybe even worse.
We're all concerned about inflation, price stability, and that's one of your mandates as at the Federal Reserve. In the event that inflation does rise precipitously and becomes an issue, we hope not, but it could, what tools would the Federal Reserve utilize or have left to maintain or work toward price stability?
Our most fundamental and well understood tools really are for that purpose, for the purpose of guiding inflation. That's really our tools that create accommodative or less accommodative monetary policy. So that's interest rates, and it's also asset purchases. So let me just say we don't expect the kind of inflation that you talked about, but we have those tools, and if we were to face inflation that moved up and that threatened to de-anchor inflation expectations materially above 2%, then we would have those tools and we would use them in a way to guide inflation back to 2%.
Now, this clip by Jerome Powell is shocking because he said something that he didn't really want to say, but he had no choice. Essentially, he was asked, okay, which tools do you have to handle inflation or runaway inflation? And he had to basically answer the only answer he had, which is interest rates. So he basically said, well, we'll handle this with the interest rates or some stuff like that. Essentially, when he says it, he doesn't want to say we're going to have to raise interest rates because that's going to send a lot of people panicking, which it did anyways. But this is the first time I heard Jerome Powell actually say, well, even though we don't think the inflation is that bad, but if it gets out of hand, we got it. We're going to raise interest rates. In other words, of course, he avoided saying these specific words, but that's what he meant. That's the first time I heard Jerome Powell actually say this. If you listen to his interviews from a few months ago, he's like, well, we're not even going to raise rates for years. This ain't ever going to happen. This is theoretical. Now he's actually talking about this as a possible viable solution, which is a massive shift in his thinking paradigm. In my opinion, I think that's a lot of the reason why the stock market is reacting the way it is. Now, what am I doing to handle this? In fact, I made a whole video explaining how I'm rotating my portfolio to have it better mitigated versus this risk. I'm adding a lot of rotation stocks to my portfolio to mitigate against a potential turnaround crash, whatever you want to call it. The video is going to be right here. You can click it, go and watch it. My full strategy is there. There's no links to courses. All the information is in the video. It's a very brief video. I highly recommend you watch it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you, I hope, in a better day tomorrow. Later.